Well, we are starting the Gospel of Luke. We actually started last week, and it's some introductory material. We've got through the first 4 verses. So to kind of catch us up, somebody who was here last week, maybe a couple of you can maybe share what was last week all about. What did you learn last week? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'll start off. I like the way my Bible reads it. I may not be a reading Bible. Because many were willing to write an account of those events which we are persuaded. So he's giving an account of the eyewitnesses and the people who actually experienced Jesus, and is putting it in an orderly order.
And how does that inform us concerning this gospel we're going to spend time in?
It was an eyewitness account. He spoke to people who were there with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like first-hand information, I guess is what
Yeah.
That he has done a lot of research and he's presenting it as a historian or what we would consider like a journalist of our day. That he went around.
Well, not journalists our day, because they don't really do journalism. But yeah, let's stick with historian. So the end result of all that is that he is trustworthy, and what we're going to be studying is the fact. I think of Dragnet, just the facts. Just give me the facts, and that's what Luke does for us. He gives us the facts in context. And so, as we begin this first section in the Gospel of Luke, we see that we're going to be covering the birth of the perfect man and his family. This kind of an introductory to this point of the book itself, and really the section we're going to go into now is introductory in the sense that the announcements of the births of John and Jesus really are a kind of background to what he really wants to get to, and that is the life of Jesus, the Son of Man, the Son of God. And we saw the purpose of the gospel in the first 4 verses. Now today we're going to I probably begin looking at Gabriel appears to Zacharias and announces the birth of John, verses 5 through 25. So let's look here. Now, interesting at this point, now, if you remember last week, we said that when Luke writes this introduction telling the basis upon which he's writing this gospel and all that, he writes it in the same style that you find other historians of that time writing. So this is no different. But when he starts verse 5, it appears that from verses 5, for some large part here, that he is apparently writing from an Aramaic account. In other words, what he's writing was possibly originally written in Aramaic, and he has simply translated it to Greek for his reader. Because there's a lot of Hebraisms in it. There's a lot of indications that this was originally not a Greek document, and that he may actually be quoting from a document. Some speculate that maybe this account was written by Mary. We know that he had a lot of contact with Mary, the mother of Jesus. So interesting. I'll be pointing out some of the Hebraisms as we go along. Verse 5, he gives us the historical setting, as any good historian would do. He can't give us the year because they didn't have the years like we do now. So if anybody wants to sell you a coin that says 120 AD, no, that's not possible because that hadn't been invented yet. The whole AD designation. So he tells us the time frame by saying, in the days of Herod. That is Hebraism, in the days. Now, if you've read much Old Testament, you may remember hearing that expression, in the days. And so that's part of what's being said here. In the days of Herod, king of Judea. Now, we should pause right here and kind of talk about what Herod is this. Because if you read the New Testament, you come across the name Herod a number of times. And it's not all the same person, which can be confusing. So which Herod is this? Anybody know?
Herod the Great.
Herod the Great. Yeah, he's the father of the grandfather of the other Herods that we will encounter later. Herod the Great is the Herod of the nativity of Jesus and the one who attempts to kill Jesus. And then he dies long before Jesus comes on the scene in his ministry. That's a different Herod later on. I would love to spend time going over with you where Herod the Great came from, how did he become king? But I'm going to be covering that in New Testament times on Sunday evening sometime soon. And so as not to be too repetitive, I will simply invite you to come out to New Testament times, and you'll find all about the fascinating history of Herod. He was not a Jew. He was an Idumean, which is another way of saying an Edomite. And the Edomites came from, now I'm actually not going into much detail here. I'm just going to give you a little bit of smattering. You may think, I thought you weren't going to go into this. Just a little tiny bit. Who are the Edomites? Descendants of who?
Esau.
Esau. So Herod the Great is a descendant of Esau. What kind of relationship was there between the descendants of Esau and the descendants of Jacob? Yeah, not good. It wasn't good between Jacob and Esau, and it didn't get any better as time went on. Won't go into all that. So Herod the Great really gets on the throne of Judea through the appointment by the Roman Senate. So he's there, an appointed king by the Roman Senate, ruling over the Jewish people, not being a Jew himself, trying in many ways to accommodate himself to the Jews. But again, there's a lot more to that I'll go into on Sunday night, probably not long from now. All right, so that's essentially Herod. He's the king of Judea. Now, any questions that are not too specific about Herod the Great before we go on? Yes.
Now, Esau was the son of Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
So he still had the same father, but technically by God's saying Jacob is Israel now, he is the same blood. He just
Yeah, they're
isn't-
both, and you can trace it back to Shem. They're both Semitic, but just like the Arabic people, they're descendants of Abraham, but
Yeah.
great animosity
But they're
between
not-
the
but he's
Arabs
not
and
considered a Jew
Israelites.
or a Hebrew, even
No.
though his dad is Isaac.
Right,
Okay.
because only Jacob is called Israel.
Okay.
Esau is not. Okay, any other questions? All right, let's go on. So we know the time frame. It's when Herod was king of Judea. And that ended, we get too much into this. There's some disagreement as to about when Herod died. I think from the research I've done, he died probably in 2 BC. All right, so he was ruling for, I think, about 40 years prior to that. So that gives you an idea of date-wise what we're talking about. All right, so during this time, there was a priest named Zacharias, or Zachariah, if you want to put it in Hebrew terms. Zacharias is the Greek, Zachariah is the Hebrew, and I may use them interchangeably, so you'll know that if you hear me say one word or the other, it's the same person. Literally, it says there arose or came to be a priest, which is another Hebraism. Now, we're told more specifically about Zechariah that he is of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron. All right, what's this division of Abijah? Well, there's so many priests, they were divided up into groups, which they called colleges, and not in the sense that you go to university today, but in the sense of, we think of the college of cardinals that elect the Pope. So it's just a division. And there were 24 groups of priests. This was done when they came back from Babylon. Each of these groups did duty in the temple for 8 days, from one Sabbath to another, once every 6 months. The service of the week was subdivided among the various families which constituted what was called a course. On Sabbaths, the whole course was on duty. So that's where there's the overlap. On feast days, any priest might come up and join in the ministrations of the sanctuary. And at the Feast of Tabernacles, all the 24 courses were bound to be present and officiate. The course of Abijah was the 8th of the 24. So maybe that's not a little complicated, but we're just, Luke is pointing out to us exactly what group of priests Zechariah belonged to. So again, this points out the historicity of what he's saying. He's not just saying once upon a time there was a, no, he's telling us exactly what group he was in. And then very interesting, he says he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron. Now, why put that in there? And what does that mean? A wife from the daughters of Aaron.
Is it different than being part of Abijah? Because, I mean, Aaron was the beginning of the priestly line.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't he have been from Aaron? Or is it saying that she was a direct descendant from Aaron?
Yeah, I think that's what it's saying.
So for the
Because Aaron-
the priestly legacy that Christ is, well, that John will have.
Yeah, so not only, now if you were in the tribe of Levi, which would be the priests, you know, that would include descendants of Aaron, descendants of Moses, you know, and other, and Miriam. So those would all be in the tribe of Levi and probably others as well. But she was a direct descendant of Aaron. Now, if you were a priest, you could marry within the tribe of Levi. I think you could even marry outside the tribe. But this specifically tells us that not only was his wife in the priestly tribe of the Levites, but was a direct descendant of Aaron. What's the importance of that?
The appointing of the anointing, kind of like Elisha laying on the mantle. It doesn't something come from the blood, the mother, the legacy, the heritage, or something like that to the children? I'm getting it all.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that aspect of it, but it is basically saying this, that Zechariah was not just an ordinary priest. I mean, he was an ordinary priest in a sense, but he was married to someone who was a descendant of Aaron, which meant he had like a double blessing. He was considered to have been great because of the marriage. You know, who you're married to makes a difference. As someone has said, it's like a preacher being married to a preacher's daughter. You know, there's a lot of good stuff there. And then we're told her name. Her name was Elizabeth. In Hebrew, it's Elisheba. You probably can't read all that, but I put it up because I didn't have a real picture of her. And Elizabeth is the spelling in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation. But let me tell you what we know about this word Elisheba. Well, you may recognize, what do you see there that you...
Elisha.
Elisha. And Elisha is a combination of, first of all, Eli. What is Eli? Yeah, my God. Remember El? If you remember some weeks ago when I spoke in church, Eli, my God, Eli. So the feminine name Elisheba is a name that means God. And literally it's the word seven, but that has a connotation of an oath. So it's God's oath or bound to God with an oath. There's this idea of God and an oath. The name only occurs once in the Hebrew Bible, and that's in Exodus 6:23, talking about the daughter of Aminadab and sister of Nahshon, who is introduced as the wife of Aaron. So she has the same name as the wife of Aaron, from whom she is descended. Now, for Luke to include this, for any Jewish reader, and primarily he's writing to Gentiles, but any Jewish reader would recognize and remember, oh, That's pretty important. She has the same name as the wife of Aaron, and she's a descendant of Aaron. That means she is a pretty important person, genetically at least. All right, let's see if there's anything else. Basically, it just tells a little bit more about what we're going to see. All right, so they're both not only Levites, but Elizabeth is in a special lineage. But not only lineage, because, you know, lineage doesn't really mean anything if you don't live it, right? You could be a descendant of anybody. You could be, you know, I'm thinking of, I'm trying to think of somebody important. You could be, it doesn't matter. You can think of anybody. And we all know children, grandchildren of very God-honoring people that don't turn out that way. But it tells us in verse 6, they were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. Now, wait a minute. There's none righteous. No, not one. So there's a contradiction in the Bible. So what's this mean?
Did they understand by faith the sacrificial nature and the aspect of the sacrifices being a way to wipe clean their sins? Because they were righteous in the sight of God, meaning they obviously had a relationship with God.
Yes, and without getting too far afield, recently I've become more aware of how our perception of Old Testament sacrifice is so tainted in a sense by our understanding of the sacrifice that Jesus made, that we project that back on Old Testament sacrifice. Old Testament sacrifices were not to take away sin. There was no sacrifice for sin, for deliberate sin. There's none. It was all for unintentional things. In fact, what's called the sin sacrifice is really a misnomer. It was not a sacrifice for sin. It was a sacrifice of decontamination. And we're going to get to that a little bit later, so I won't say any more about that. But so what's the saying? They're both righteous. She explains it, or Luke explains it by saying that they walked blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. In other words, by their walk, by the way they live their lives, people would look at them and say, these people are righteous people. They keep the commandments. They keep the requirements, the ordinances, the legal requirements, all the Levitical ordinances. They keep all this. It's not looking at the fact that they don't have, they're sinless. It's not looking at righteousness in the eyes of God. It's looking at it says righteous in the sight of God, but as far as how people view them, that they are keeping the commandments. So they were righteous people from that standpoint. It's not talking about being sinless. So from all outward appearances, they lived godly lives, in other words. Godet says it this way: the term righteous indicates general conformity of conduct to the divine precepts. This quality does not absolutely exclude sin, as we'll see later. This word righteous is also a word used in the Old Testament to describe Noah and Job. They're righteous. Okay, so we have to understand context when we're looking at any word. And the same is true here. So when Paul's talking about there's none righteous, or it's actually quoting the Old Testament, there's none righteous, he is talking about in a legal sense, there's none righteous because there's sin and we're guilty. But in this case, it's looking at it from the standpoint of how others view them, how God even views them as far as their attempts to live out their faith. Okay, any comments?
So righteous is not synonymous for sinless.
Right. It can be, but
not necessarily.
yeah, every word has a context. And we do an injustice to God's word if we say a word always means a certain thing, because it doesn't always mean a certain thing with us either. And I could go into a lot of examples, but you know what I'm talking about. So we always have to look at context. All right, so these are two people that seem to be in a prime place of blessing. Would you not agree? They're in the tribe of Levi. She's a direct descendant of Aaron. They live a life of holiness, which they put their faith into practice. They should be blessed, shouldn't they? Shouldn't God bless them? But he hasn't. Look what it says next, verse 7. But they had no child.
Yet.
At this point, they had no child because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in years. Okay, so first let's talk about having no child. What's the import of that in that culture?
No heir, no legacy.
What was that?
No heir, no legacy.
No heir, no legacy?
Punishment for sin.
It would appear to be a punishment for sin. God's not blessing me.
And the more children, especially male children, that they had, the better supposedly it was.
Yeah, that indicate the blessing of God. It also provided a means of your survival in old age. No welfare, no social security, all that stuff back then. But notice what it says next. Elizabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in years. Now, what does that tell us? Yeah, but what does that tell us about the situation?
She's
past
childbearing.
Yeah, have no child and no prospects for having a child. The time is over. And could you imagine they're pretty much resigned to that fact at this point? Yeah, this advance in years is, I thought I had a note here about that. I don't see it. Well, let me ask you this. Can you think of other people that appeared to be righteous people that God withheld children? Okay, I mean, too many at once.
Sarah.
Sarah
And Abraham.
and Abraham,
Hannah.
Hannah,
Rachel.
Rachel,
Rachel.
for a long time. Another one we don't even know her name, Manoah's wife. Do you remember Manoah?
I was trying to think of her name.
Manoah was the father of Samson. Remember the same situation?
Right.
An angel appeared and said, "You're going to have a child." So there are a lot of similarities between what's going to happen here in the situation and other women that we have seen before in the Old Testament. So they had experienced childlessness because of physical problems. That's why it's important. He said that Elizabeth was barren, not because of spiritual ones. Spiritually, they were okay, right? Spiritually, they were where they should be. Physically, there was an issue which prevented them from having the blessing of children. All right, any comments to this point? We can make application to how sometimes we judge God's blessing in ways that maybe he is not judging. You know, we assume certain things. Well, if I don't have this or whatever it might be, then God's not blessing me. But we don't know that. And we shouldn't assume those things. All right, verse 8. I love this expression. Now it happened. That's another Hebraism. Did we see? I remember in the books of Samuel, we saw that every once in a while, or something similar to that. Now it happened, which on the surface indicates what?
It was always preordained to happen.
Well, underneath, that's what we understand. But on the surface, it seems what? Now it happened. It seems like, oh, it's a coincidence, just something that occurred. Now, underneath, we know what John said, and that is that's part of God's plan.
That's how Luke 2 starts as well.
Luke 2 starts that way.
That wasn't just.
Yeah. Now it happened. While he was performing his priestly service before God, and remember, that was something that didn't occur often because they were all divided up into these different groups. in the appointed order of his division, according to the custom of the priestly office. Now that the division is out of the 24 groups that I told you about before. Now, only 4 of those actually returned from Babylon. And so in order to keep the 24 number, they took those 4 groups of priests and divided them up to kind of represent all the groups that had not returned from Babylon. I don't know if you realize that not a lot of the Jewish people returned from Babylon when the decree was issued that they could return and rebuild the city and the temple. And we know all about that, Ezra and Nehemiah, and the things that occurred following that. But the book of Esther is a good indication of how many people were left behind. Not that they were left behind, but they chose to stay behind. So when the decree was going out for Haman to kill all the Jews there, that was the larger part of the Jewish people were still living in Persia, had not returned. And so there's only 4 groups of priests that return. Interesting point there. And there were so many priests, even that they performed particular tasks by lottery within their particular family. And so as a priest, Zechariah served at the temple for 2 one-week periods a year. But there's a lot to be done there. So we're going to get to this next part here. He was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. The temple of the Lord here refers to what's called the holy place. So if you look at this diagram of the temple, the courtyards outside the temple, you can see some of the gates around there. And this is the women's courtyard. The women could not go beyond here. The Gentiles couldn't go beyond here. This is the holy place, this area here. And then here is the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place. This was the area where the Ark of the Covenant was, and into which no one entered except the high priest once a year. Other stuff took place out here, and generally out here. So he was chosen by lot to enter into the holy place here in order to burn incense. And it was by lot.
And how many Levite priests were in the, I forget, I know it's a high number for the lot.
Well, it was within that division of priests, which were thousands.
18,000 says here.
Okay. Yeah. Just within that group. So the chances of you getting picked are pretty small. And so in the course of his whole life, this is probably the only time that he had been picked to do this particular task. Because there's a lot of other tasks too, each day. In the Old Testament, when it talked about deciding something by lot, they referred to the Urim and the Thummim, which you may remember the high priest had. And we're not sure really what that was, except that it seems from descriptions that there were 2 stones in 2 pockets of the high priest, and he was able to determine yes or no of a decision. But it was a mechanical way of determining the will of God. It was used as a way to divide the promised land among the tribes in Joshua. It was used by the early church to choose a new apostle to replace Judas in Acts chapter 1. So the point to notice here is he wasn't elected by his fellow priests. It wasn't a democracy, nor was there a contest to determine who was the most righteous of the priests to do this task. The only one who could choose a priest for this sacred service was God himself. And he did so through the casting of lots. So it was truly a great privilege for him to have the opportunity to do this, something he would remember for the rest of his life. When all his participation trophies had been tossed away, he would remember this as something that had happened to him. Now, what did the burning of incense signify? What do you know about incense?
according to my Bible reference here, it says it was to fumigate. So my assumption, which is not a good term, is that it was to clear everything out to be pure.
Okay, there is a sense of that, but I think there's a more symbolic. I mean, that may have been practically what happened. Symbolically, what was it, John?
When the worshipers would see the smoke rising from the incense, they would pray. And the prayers were rising with the smoke.
Yes, so incense was symbolic of prayers going to God. That's essentially it. And as we think about that, if you think back to the woman after whom Elizabeth is named and her husband Aaron, can you think of any other incident regarding incense?
Well, I'm thinking of Manasseh's wife, who I will remember her name shortly. That angel you speak of wouldn't give his name. It was probably Christ.
Yeah.
And at the end, they're asking him to eat, and he says, no, but I will, blah, blah, something. And then at the very end, he enters into the fire of the sacrifice that they built, and he goes up as incense goes up. So that's the picture when we're talking about this that I get in my mind,
Okay.
and I think that they knew, okay, that
Yeah, that's an interesting correlation.
yeah.
Let's go back to Aaron. What relationship is there between Aaron and the first offering of incense we find in the Bible?
The first offering, not Aaron's first offering, but I'm thinking of his sons
Yeah.
that brought false fire.
They were so excited with all the stuff that God had given them and the privilege they had to be a part of the priesthood of this new system being set up, that they, in their exaltation, offered incense to the Lord. And the Lord was so happy, he rewarded them, right? Killed them on the spot because they were going outside of the parameters that he had set. They were doing it their way, not God's way. So you think about Elizabeth. I mean, she knows about that. And now her husband has been chosen to offer incense. I wonder if it's going through her mind, I hope he does it the right way. Right? All right, now, we have 15 minutes left. I don't know if we can do this. We'll try. I want to go through the procedure because all we have here is that he offers incense. But that we can almost skip right over that. But I want us to understand what a big deal this was. Even though it happened every day. In fact, it happened twice a day. But it was still a big deal. So every day, certain sacrifices were performed in the temple. The Jewish day was divided into 12 seasonal hours. Since the day began at sundown, their evening was our afternoon. The Tamid was the communal single sacrifice of 2 lambs for the atonement and sanctification of the covenant people. The order of the morning and afternoon Tamid worship service went like this. At 3 a.m., at the cockcrow, the priests would rise to ritually bathe, dress, and begin their duties. Just as a quick aside, cockcrow refers to a trumpet-like instrument that would sound to indicate the times, the watches of the night. And so when Jesus says, before the cock crows, you're going to deny me, another place it says, before the cock crows twice, he's talking about how many watches of the night there would be before Peter would deny him. He's not talking about a rooster. Okay, just get that out of the way. And at this point, the chief priests would meet together for the first round of lots to determine who prepares the altar. Now, they would do this by lot because then no one could say, oh, you picked him because he's your favorite. I have been a teacher for a lot of years. People would say that. Oh, that person has the lead to play because they're your favorite, or they got an A because they're your favorite. Yeah. No, No chance of that here. It was by law. The chief priest then met again for a second round of lots to determine that those who were to take part in the sacrifice itself, who was to trim the golden candlestick, who would make ready the altar of incense within the holy place. Then the president would send someone to the highest pinnacle of the temple to see if it was time to kill the sacrifice, because that had to be done as the morning opened. If the priest reported that morning had already arrived, he was asked if the sun shone all the way to Hebron. At first, if he said it was, the sun is all the way out. So in other words, it's over all the land. The first unblemished male lamb was brought out and inspected a last time. The lamb is given a drink of water from a golden bowl prior to the sacrifice. When the lamb had been prepared, the order was given to open the temple gates. And as the last great gate slowly moved on its hinges, the priests, on a signal given, blew 3 blasts on their silver trumpets, summoning the Levites and the representatives of the people to their duties, and announcing to the city that the morning sacrifice was about to be offered. You did not need an alarm clock in Jerusalem. This blast from the silver trumpets of the priests seemed to awaken the city, as with the voice of God, to the life of another day. Immediately upon this, the great gates which led into the holy place itself were opened to admit the priests who were to cleanse the candlestick and the altar of incense. So these gates are opened, and now next this gate will be open for the priests to enter into this area. By the way, sometimes I use the word candlestick because that's how Edersheim and some others that I've used as sources call it, but it's not actually candles. It's oil. So menorah is what I will try to use most of the time. And I want to, I'm not sure, I don't think we're going to get to doing it this way. I wanted to act this out. And for that purpose, the menorah would be over there, like under the clock against that wall. The table of showbread would be whatever that container is over there under the window. And then the altar of incense would be up here on the table where Beth is sitting. So we'll see how that works out. The opening of these gates was a signal for actually slaying the sacrificial lamb. The victim's blood was collected, splashed against the altar, and then poured out at the base. All right, so well, I think maybe next week we'll use the volunteers. I'll just explain it right now as far as we can go. While the lamb was being killed, the 2 who were chosen by lot to trim the menorah and prepare the altar of incense entered the holy place. So 2 people would come in, one to trim the menorah. Well, we can't see it on here. Let's see. Do I move the picture? Let's see here. It should be over in this area, along this wall here. But one way, I think. No. There we go. All right, so they would have, if you have anybody ever have an oil lamp? Okay, a lot of you have. So, every once in a while you have to trim it, right? Otherwise, you get a lot of black smoke and all that. So that's what they would do. Every morning they would go in, and one of the priests would trim the wicks of the menorah.
Did they just have one menorah?
There's one, yeah.
Because it's in the picture. It's number
Is it?
6. It's inside that solid, that line.
Oh, okay, yeah, this is not the holy place. Holy place is here, and I think I was wrong. This is the holy place here. The Holy of Holies is back in here. So, yeah, that's where
So the menorah is number
the
6.
lampstand is right here. Yeah, here's the curtain between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. My bad. Maybe this picture's better. Yeah, so in here, this is the holy place. So the menorah would be along here. Still can't see it. It will show right, they're showing here, but it actually, Oh, they have the menorahs lined up over here. I'm not sure why this is different because maybe research shows different people different things, but according to Edersheim, I think at least the menorah would be over on the left side. So while the lamb is being slain, the two chosen by Lot to trim the menorah and prepare the altar of incense, enter the holy place, having walked through the outer courts, so having walked through the area leading up to it, and while they were doing that, there was an instrument known as the magrifa that was struck. Now, what this was exactly, I haven't been able to find out because there are different ideas. One person said it was like a gong, so you're hitting a gong as we're walking through. Lightfoot says it was a little bell. When I tried to look up a picture of it, this is what I found. Looks like an instrument driven by air. You got a bellows there, and air comes out of these and makes a sound. That was maybe a later development, I'm guessing. Probably not. I mean, probably originally it was a gong or a bell. I don't know, but they had some kind of a musical instrument as they were going in. The first organ. Yeah. So when the Levites heard that, they would all assemble and were ready to lead the gathered people in songs of worship to God. Now, as nearly as possible, while the lamb was being slain outside, the first of the priests took with his hands the burnt coals and ashes from the golden altar, which I'm assuming is the brazen altar of sacrifice. You can go back. So he would take coals from this by hand and carry it into the holy place. First of all, he put them in a golden vessel. Brew them up by hands, put them in a vessel, and another one would fill a golden censer held in a silver vessel with the incense. The first one would then withdraw, leaving the golden vessel of ashes in the holy place. Similarly, as the blood of the lamb was being sprinkled on the altar burnt offering, picture that over there on the huge altar, the second priest ascended the 3 steps, which were made out of stone, which led up to the menorah. So there should be 3 steps leading up to the menorah over here, which we don't see pictured. He trimmed and refilled the lamps that were still burning, removed the wick and old oil from those which had become extinguished, supplied fresh, and relit them from one of the other lamps. So, get it from one lamp and then light the others. Only 5, however, of the lamps were then trimmed. The other 2 were reserved to a later period of the service. So initially, he just lit 5 of the 7 lamps. Edersheim enlightens us to the proper perspective of these activities in his book, The Temple. He says this: the tabernacle was, as its Hebrew designation shows, the place of meeting between God and Israel. The sacrificial service, that which made such meeting possible. So in other words, the only way that the people of Israel could meet with God was based upon the sacrifices. And the priest was the one who brought Israel near to God. Hence, prayer could only follow after the sacrifice. And its appropriate symbol and time was the burning of incense. So in other words, you don't pray to God before things are right with him. So once the sacrifice is made, the priest has done his duty, then the prayers can go up. And a couple indications of how incense represents that. In Psalm 141:2, may my prayer be counted as incense before you, the lifting up of my hands as the evening offering. And then in the book of Revelation, it says, when he had taken the book, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. All right. Now, we're going to continue looking at what takes place. This has been the preparation for the offering of incense. But I think you're going to find very interesting the details of what all occurs, the prayers that are said. You're going to participate in some of those prayers that were given as this ritual is performed next week. Any questions about what we've covered so far?
Sure is a lot of detail, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be toast. I'd never get it right.
Well, and you figure some of these guys only do it once in their lifetime. So other priests have to tell them, what to do. Yeah. And, I'd probably stumble on the second of the three steps. And,
Yeah, it'd be a big lightning bolt. I'd be gone.
well, that's why when we get later to the people, we're getting worried outside when Zechariah doesn't come out right away.
Well, then they kind of rope to his leg in case he did it wrong.
No, I couldn't find that anywhere.
Oh, okay, I've heard that. Somewhere.
Yeah, I know. I heard that concerning the high priest going into the Holy of Holies. But anyway, yeah, what if he goofed up?
Yeah.
So we'll look at that next week. All right, thank you.
Thank you.